And I began to formulate those thoughts into my own mind. And I was reading one day, and I was reading in what now, all these many years later, would be about 40 years later, a little more. Really, it's my life verse. It's my life verses, and it's from Hebrews chapter 12. And every time I get the chance, I read it in our meeting time, because it's one of my favorites, and it's rededicated in one sense, but it's also anchored in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I'll read it for you now. It's Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. You can enjoy this with me here from the New International Version. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Verse 2 says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. And for me, that was a very meaningful, timely piece of scripture in my life. And it's been so meaningful since that time that I often reflect on it and am encouraged. Now, I can break it down a little bit for you, but I'm going to just jump out of it for a minute and mention that my wife and I were recently traveling in France. And part of our time in France, we visited with Jerry Everhart, who is someone that East County has supported for years, and Grace Fellowship has also supported for the last several years since we have known him. And meeting Jerry in his service in the area where he works in France was a great experience for Carrie and I, and also traveling in the southern part of France, from Lyon to Caen. We experienced a lot of things that we had never experienced before. But one thing really stuck out, and I believe it stuck out to Carrie as well, and that is, for the gospel's sake, the ground in France is very hard. It's hard ground to till. And what I mean by that is, there's a knowledge of God. There's an acceptance and even a tolerance of believers. But there's not a lot of receptivity. It's kind of falling on dead ears. Or, dead ears. Deaf ears. So that was an experience that I guess I kind of expected, but when I got there and got to actually see it for myself and interpret it for myself and see how it could be effective, I began to realize really how Jerry might really need to be encouraged and have us pray for him regularly and deeply, because he is living in that, and he is trying to do the work of the gospel, the Great Commission, and he's doing it by himself with the Lord. So it was just an interesting experience. Thinking about the scripture that I read, I was compelled to kind of keep it concise for this evening so that we could kind of get through it, but still have some of the meaning of it. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of things out of this scripture from Hebrews chapter 12. So we'll talk about briefly the surrounded by such a cloud of witnesses. The thought there is really taking information from the chapter before. So I move this up a little bit, because I'm projecting about as much as I can. From chapter 11 of Hebrews, it goes into great detail about the great men and women of faith throughout history, with Abraham, with Moses, and Noah, and Rahab, and Sarah, can't hear me?
No. It turned off or something, dear.
Okay. Yep. Gonna have to just.
Hello? Yes. Thought I heard it working.
Is it working? Battery's dying. Okay.
Sorry, guys.
Project a little bit. So our information begins really in the chapter before with the great people of faith down through history. I think I'm okay. Thank you, brother. And those people were, in essence, as thinking about it as a relay race, they had run their leg of the race. It was completed, and they had endured to the finish through the hardships and the scorning and unbelief and difficulties of a sinful world, and scorned by men and women who did not love them or have their best in mind. They had finished, and they had finished well. And so at this point, when we pick this up, he's saying, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses, those people who had gone before, they're now cheering us on that we would then also finish. But wait, there's a key element there, and that is when we're likening it to a race, likening it to a competition. We are all competitors in this competition, and we are all gearing up for a race. And for us, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. But it's also a marathon that we have to engage. We have to get involved. We have to start living and living out our faith. So when you think about a race, and you think about the things that would hinder you from doing well in a race.
Just quit. Never mind.
Okay. And throwing off everything that hinders, and in the next phrase, the sin that so easily entangles us. But before we get to the sin part, there's the me part. There's the stuff that entangles me that's not necessarily sin, but it could be weighing me down, preventing me from engaging at the top priority and top level that I'm able to serve at. And those things generally, in my experience, come down to prioritizing myself over the Lord. The things that are between you and the Lord that are acceptable in your life, those are between you and the Lord. And same with me. Things that I do, that I engage in, that the Lord has given me grace and freedom to participate in, I am free to take part in those things, but they may not be the best choices. They may be weighing me down. And some of those things, I was just thinking today, Carrie and I, we lament from time to time that we don't have any grandkids, but, that's a priority that God will give us in His timing. And if we're worried about that, that's something, it's an example of something that could be weighing us down. And we're not weighed down by it. We're in pretty good shape. We're waiting for that right time, and the Lord brings that about in our lives. So it's a good thing. It's not sin, but it could be a weight if the focus is on the Lord. The sin that so easily entangles us, that does become part of the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Those things that do take our focus and are actually missing the mark. Things that displease the Lord and are a cause for us to need to repent in our lives and turn away from that sin and pursue righteousness or pursue the Lord. And a better way to look at it is simply keeping our eyes on Jesus. It says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So I looked at this and I think about persevering. And as it happened when we were in France, we visited a little place called Sainte Marguerite Island. And it was fun because we loved Marguerite and we always knew she was a saint. But I have to say, there's quite a little history that goes with Sainte Marguerite Island. It's actually the place,
We can't hear you. Wait till that goes over.
it's one of four places. We visited a place called Sainte Marguerite Island. It's off of Cannes, off of the south of France, off the coast. And it's just a 15-minute boat ride. But it's the place where the Mask was held. It's one of four places where the Mask, the historical figure, the Mask, or the person who was kept in the Mask, was held for many, many years. And it was, in fact, it's called Fort Royal, and it was built for containing this man. And no one knew what his crime was. No one knew what he looked like. No one knew what his name was. And no one knew anything about him after he had passed away. He was not spoken of, except in the ambiguous term of the mask, or the man with the mask. Anyway, after that time, it was used to house some Huguenot prisoners, if you will. And I'm just going to read a brief notation about the Huguenots in that area, in that era. And this was actually on the wall among so many really cool historical factors along the way, but this one really caught my attention because the Huguenots were Protestants in France in the late 1600 time period. And this is from 1689 to 1725, and it says, on October 18th, 1685, following years of persecution against the Huguenots, King Louis XIV revoked the Tolerance Edict. Nantes Protestant ministers and pastors were forced to convert or go into exile. 6 pastors who had secretly returned to France to preach the gospel were apprehended for religious crimes and incarcerated at Fort Royal. So in those very cells where we were, these men were there. And then it goes on to say, it names the men, it goes on to say they were treated with severity. What's so powerful about it is that it says they never adjured, they never revoked, they never abandoned their faith. They sang psalms to comfort each other and prayed to break their isolation. It says Martharin, who's one of the 6, was the sole survivor, and he was freed in 1714 at the age of 73. And I just thought it was such a perfect point to make during the discussion about persevering in the faith and keeping our eyes on Jesus. None of us have suffered to that level. And even they didn't suffer to the level that the Lord suffered to. But what incredible perseverance, and for we who persevere in the faith, what an encouragement to keep at it, to keep our eyes on Jesus. So a couple of thoughts about it that I think are poignant. Well, one of the elements of running a race is pulling off all the things that weight us down and going as light as we can. When I had my hips replaced, both my right and left hips were replaced in the last 18 months or so, when I had that done, something that I no longer could do is run. And, you know, I'm one of those few people that I love to run. And I kind of, in many ways, it could have been a little bit of an entanglement for me, because sometimes I can say I live to run. And running for me, but I do understand the analogy of getting everything down to just your shoes and whatever you're wearing, lightweight, and engaging with the trail, and getting your breathing and your muscles and all of your strength